As our luxury estate in the Hamptons was completely engulfed in towering, suffocating flames, I was pinned helplessly beneath a burning oak beam, the blistering heat melting the flesh on my face and hands. Through the thick, blinding black smoke, I heard my daughter-in-law, Chloe, scream at my son with cold, terrifying precision. "Don't save him. Save my dad first. Richard is the one who controls the money. He's the one who actually matters." My son Julian hesitated for 3 agonizing seconds. I looked up through the roaring sparks and caught his eyes. Then, without a single word of hesitation, he grabbed his multi-millionaire father-in-law's hand and walked away into the darkness, leaving his own father to burn alive in the inferno. A few days later, they held an empty casket funeral, claimed my multi-million-dollar financial technology patents, and moved on with their opulent lives as if I had never existed. But they had no idea. I survived. Before we go any further into how I dismantled their Wall Street empire piece by piece, I want to ask you a simple question. If you were trapped beneath burning timber and watched your own child turn his back on you to save his wealthy father-in-law, would you ever forgive him? Or would you return from the dead to erase his entire legacy? Drop your thoughts in the comments below. Tell me your city, your state, or your country. I read every single one. Welcome to Dad's Ultimate Payback. It was precisely 9 minutes past 9 on the bitterly cold, gray morning of October 6th when the high-speed express elevator came to a silent halt on the 38th floor of the Sterling & Associates Tower in Hudson Yards. The polished brass doors slid open with a soft pneumatic hiss, and I stepped onto the pristine white Italian marble floor for the first time in 12 long years. My name is Arthur Sterling. I am 68 years old, and according to every legal filing, death certificate, and probate record processed in the state of New York between 2013 and 2019, I do not exist. The main lobby was a physical manifestation of the kind of astronomical wealth that buys absolute silence. Floor-to-ceiling glass looking out over the indifferent, cloudy skyline of Manhattan. Muted, recessed lighting, and the subtle scent of expensive cedar and fresh white lilies. Behind a massive floating quartz desk sat a young receptionist. She offered the automatic, corporate smile standard for front desk personnel at high-end Wall Street firms. Then her eyes drifted downward to my right hand, the one I hadn't bothered to cover with a leather glove that morning. Her smile dismantled itself in real time. The thick, jagged silver burn scars climbing from my calloused wrist, weaving across my knuckles, and trailing all the way up the right side of my jawline had a habit of doing that to people. It unraveled their artificial composure before I even opened my mouth. To her credit, she recovered fast. She pressed her palms flat against the quartz desk, lifted her chin, and forced a professional tone. "Good morning, sir. Do you have an appointment with someone on this floor today?" "Arthur Sterling," I said, my voice low, gravelly, and carrying the unyielding weight of a decade spent in the shadows. "I have a 9 o'clock meeting with Julian Sterling." She blinked once, twice, the color drained from her cheeks like wet ink spreading across a paper towel. Her fingers hovered frantically over her intercom console. One moment, Mr. Sterling. Please hold." I didn't sit in the designer leather chairs. I walked over to the floor-to-ceiling glass wall and looked down at the Hudson River 40 stories below. 48 hours ago, I had been sitting in a secure server facility in Brooklyn, watching Cipher Corp's automated protocols dismantle the hidden offshore accounts that my son believed were invisible to the living world. Today, I was standing inside the very fortress Julian had erected using the core encryption patents he had stolen, while I lay unconscious in a hospital burn unit. Through the glass doors behind the reception desk, I could see the grand boardroom. Gathered around a 40-foot mahogany table were 25 of Wall Street's most powerful institutional investors, corporate attorneys, and investment bankers, along with prominent financial journalists. Today was supposed to be the crowning achievement of Julian's life. The final signing of Sterling & Associates' $1.2 billion offering, IPO. I heard him before I saw him. The rapid, aggressive cadence of $10,000 Italian leather shoes striking marble. The sharp swing of a glass door thrown open far too hard. "What do you mean there's an old man standing in the lobby claiming to be?" Julian stopped dead in his tracks the second his eyes locked onto me. He was 40 years old now, dressed in a flawless charcoal bespoke suit, his dark hair cropped short, his jawline carrying the arrogant authority of a man who managed a billion-dollar portfolio. He had become everything he had ever dreamed of. But standing 20 feet from his dead father, every single layer of that expensive Wall Street armor peeled off him like wet paint under a blowtorch. His face went entirely slack. His mouth opened, but the words simply refused to arrive. "Hello, Julian," I said softly, my voice cutting through the quiet lobby. "That's..." His voice cracked violently on the first syllable. He swallowed hard, his chest heaving under his tailored vest as he took a tentative step forward. "That's impossible. And yet," I said, letting my scarred right hand rest calmly at my side, fully exposed to the bright fluorescent lights of his empire, "here I am, Julian crossed the room in 5 rigid strides, stopping just inches away, as if proximity might clarify what his eyes were telling him, but his brain refused to accept. "You're dead," he whispered, his voice shaking uncontrollably. "The hospital, the fire in the Hamptons, there was an official confirmation. There was a death certificate, Dad. You held a funeral," I said, holding his gaze without flinching. "Yes, I know. I read the obituary. Lovely flowers." From what the photographs showed. His chest heaved erratically. His right hand shot toward the breast pocket of his jacket. Reaching for his phone, I suspected, then stopped, pulling back as if he realized how panicked he looked in front of his staff. "How long?" he asked, his voice dropping to a raw, jagged whisper. "How long have you been alive?" 12 years, I said. "Give or take a few weeks." The shock was still written across every line of his face, but beneath it, moving slow and purposeful like a current under ice, something else was rising. I recognized it immediately. I had raised him after all. It was cold, desperate calculation. He glanced anxiously toward the glass boardroom, where the IPO investors were beginning to look out into the lobby, wondering why the CEO had suddenly abandoned the signing table. "Dad," Julian said, uttering the word with extraordinary, fragile precision, "whatever you think brought you here, whatever you think you know, we can handle this privately, quietly, in my office, without making a scene." "I agree completely," I said, tilting my head slightly. "That is precisely why I booked this appointment through your assistant 3 days ago, privately, quietly, just as you prefer." Before Julian could process my words, I reached inside my dark overcoat with my undamaged left hand and pulled out a heavy, cream-colored document envelope sealed with an official red wax stamp. With a smooth, deliberate motion, I slapped the envelope down onto the quartz reception desk right in front of him, the heavy thud echoing through the silent room. Julian stared down at the wax seal, his eyes narrowing in sheer terror. "What is this?" "That is a certified notice of active legal standing, issued yesterday morning by the Chancery Court of the State of Delaware," I said, my voice echoing clearly enough to reach the open doorway of the boardroom. "It establishes in plain, unshakable legal language that Arthur Sterling is alive, legally solvent, and the sole owner of the original foundational patents underpinning your entire $1.2 billion enterprise. It also serves as an immediate injunction." Julian's face went from pale to a ghostly, translucent white. "An injunction? The moment your board members open that envelope," I continued calmly, "your $1.2 billion IPO is legally frozen. Every transaction your firm has executed since 2013 becomes subject to federal audit. And every document you are about to sign in that room becomes evidence of corporate fraud." The blood drained from Julian's face in a slow, steady tide. Through the glass walls, several high-profile investors stood up from the mahogany table. Noticing their CEO frozen in horror at the front desk, Julian looked at the envelope, then looked up at my scarred face, his jaw trembling violently. He realized in that exact second that the helpless old man he had left to burn in the Hamptons 12 years ago had not returned to beg for an explanation. I had returned to tear entire world down to the bedrock. The heavy oak door of the VIP conference room clicked shut, sealing out the chaotic murmurs echoing from the Hudson Yards lobby. Inside, the air smelled of cold espresso, polished leather, and the invisible, suffocating weight of sheer panic. Julian stood near the head of a 20-foot mahogany table, his chest heaving under his bespoke charcoal suit, his knuckles white where he gripped the back of an armchair. I remained standing near the floor-to-ceiling glass wall, my hands loosely folded over my cane, letting my scarred right cheek catch the harsh midday glare of the Manhattan skyline. Before Julian could find his voice, the heavy double doors swung open again with sharp, aggressive velocity. Chloe Vance Sterling swept into the room, her high heels clicking like rapid gunshots against the hardwood perimeter. She was wrapped in an ivory silk blouse and a tailored black blazer, her jawline sharp, her eyes cold with the inherited arrogance of old Wall Street money. Behind her walked Evelyn, my former wife, looking frail in a steel gray jacket, her pearl earrings trembling against her neck. The moment Evelyn's eyes landed on my face, her footing completely gave way. She stumbled backward, clutching the doorframe with both hands, her mouth opening in a silent, horrified gasp. The color left her skin in a sickening wave, leaving her looking hollowed out by 12 years of unvoiced guilt. "Arthur," Evelyn breathed, her voice fracturing into a ragged whisper that barely carried across the quiet room. "Oh, God. Arthur, you're really alive." "Sit down, Mom," Julian cut in sharply, his voice dropping into a harsh, controlled snap. "We don't have time for a family reunion right now." Evelyn flinched as if she had been physically struck, but she didn't argue. She sank slowly into the nearest leather chair, her trembling hands pressed flat against the dark mahogany table, her eyes overflowing with tears she couldn't stop. Chloe, however, didn't flinch. She bypassed her mother-in-law completely, stepping directly into my line of sight with her chin tilted high. She cast a brief, involuntary glance at the silver-jagged burn scars climbing up my jawline, and her lips curled into a subtle mask of revulsion and calculation. "I don't know what kind of pathetic ghost story you think you're playing here, Arthur," Chloe said, her tone smooth, polished, and dripping with lethal condescension. "You think you can walk out of the ashes after 12 years and disrupt a billion-dollar public offering? Let me educate you on how Wall Street works today. The Vance family controls 3 major media conglomerates and half the financial press in this city. If you step out of this building without signing a complete legal release, I will have every national network paint you as a bitter, unstable, bankrupt old man who abandoned his family a decade ago. We will tie you up in character assassination and counter lawsuits until you don't have a single dollar left to pay for your prescription drugs." I looked at Chloe for a long moment, my expression unreadable. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't offer her the satisfaction of an angry response. "Lovely to see you too, Chloe," I said mildly. "Marriage to my son clearly hasn't dulled your charm." Julian stepped between us, slapping a thick, heavy document folder onto the center of the table. The gold-embossed crest of Sterling and Associates gleamed on the cover. "Look at me, Dad," Julian demanded, his voice tight, pleading, and laced with raw desperation. "Forget the press. Forget the lawsuits. Let's talk numbers. This is a non-disclosure and asset relinquishment agreement. You sign over all residual claims to the original CipherGuard patents, and I will personally wire $10 million in liquid cash to any offshore account of your choice within the hour. $10 million, Dad. Free and clear. You can buy a villa in Europe, live out the rest of your life in luxury, and never have to look at a courtroom. It's more money than you ever made in your entire career as a research engineer." He pushed a Mont Blanc fountain pen across the polished wood until it rested against the folder. He stared at me with wide, bloodshot eyes, genuinely believing that green paper could heal the skin they had watched burn off my face in the Hamptons. I looked down at the pen. Then I looked at Evelyn, who couldn't bring herself to meet my gaze, and finally at Julian. $10 million, I repeated quietly. A faint, cold smile touched the left side of my mouth, the side untouched by the fire. $10 million to buy my silence on a company currently valuation priced at $1.2 billion. It's a generous offer, Arthur, Chloe snapped, folding her arms. Take the money and disappear again. You were always very good at disappearing. The offer is insulting, I said, leaning my cane against the table as I took a deliberate step forward. Not because of the number, Julian, but because you actually believe you own the technology you've been selling for the last 11 years. Julian's jaw tightened. What are you talking about? The Vance family registered the complete CipherGuard source code and system architecture patents in 2014. The Delaware filings are airtight. They registered the blueprint, son, I said, my voice dropping an octave, carrying a terrifying quiet authority that made even Chloe freeze. They registered 75% of the blueprint. You see, back in 2013, before Richard Vance decided to leave me under a burning oak beam, I knew he was trying to steal my research. I wasn't stupid. Pages 47 through 62 of the foundational core architecture, the mathematical key that governs the entire dynamic encryption algorithm, were never written down on paper. They were never uploaded to a server. They were never filed with the patent office. The room went dead, suffocatingly quiet. The only sound was the faint hum of the air conditioning 40 stories above Manhattan. Julian blinked, his face draining of color. What are you saying? I'm saying that Richard stole an incomplete engine, I continued, resting my scarred right hand flat on the mahogany table, directly over his $10 million contract. For 11 years, Sterling and Associates has sold the CipherGuard framework to 8 of the world's largest investment banks, claiming it is an unhackable financial defense system. But because you are missing the final 25% of my algorithm, your entire platform relies on a temporary patch, a mathematical bypass that your chief technicians built to mask the gap. Chloe's eyes narrowed in sudden panic. You're bluffing, am I? I turned my gaze directly to Julian. Every 3 months, your core servers experience a 3-second latency spike during high-volume trading hours, don't they? Your engineers call it a routine system maintenance buffer. It isn't a buffer, Julian. It's a structural flaw. It is a fatal, subterranean backdoor caused by the missing code. And the moment I publish the true, original mathematical key to the federal banking regulators tomorrow morning, every single security certificate your firm has issued since 2014 will be rendered instantly void. Julian's breath hitched in his throat. He staggered back a half step, clutching the edge of his desk as the catastrophic reality settled into his bones. If that code goes public, Julian whispered, his voice trembling violently, our banking partners will face total system vulnerability. The liability claims alone will exceed hundreds of millions. It will crash the entire network. It won't just crash your network, son, I whispered, leaning in close until he could see his own terrified reflection in my eyes. It will wipe out your father-in-law's legacy, Cancel your IPO and dissolve your firm by the end of the week. Keep your $10 million. I didn't come here for your money. I came for everything else. The cold, damp air of the East River clung to the exposed brick walls of the subterranean sanctuary, nestled beneath an unmarked century-old industrial warehouse in Dumbo, Brooklyn. Far removed from the sterile, gilded opulence of Hudson Yards, this three-level underground bunker served as the nerve center for Cipher Corp. Here, there were no polished marble floors, no curated white lilies, and no corporate PR handlers crafting rehearsed lies. Instead, the cavernous space hummed with the steady, rhythmic pulse of 42 high-performance server stacks, their neon blue indicators flickering in the dim overhead light like the heartbeat of a sleeping leviathan. I stood before a curved, wall-sized glass display monitor, stripping off my wet coat to reveal my dark wool sweater. My scarred right hand traced the glowing blue financial schematics cascading across the screen. Beside me stood Elias Thorne, my 34-year-old chief technology officer and the brilliant mind who had helped me construct this digital fortress out of nothing over the last 6 years. Elias was a man of intense focus, lean and sharp-eyed, possessing an uncanny ability to process complex data streams as effortlessly as other men breathed air. He was also one of the very few souls on this planet who knew that Arthur Sterling had not perished in the flames of the Hamptons 12 years ago. The fallout from your morning appearance at Hudson Yards is already rippling through the private networks, Arthur, Elias said, his voice quiet, steady, and carrying the cool precision of a veteran strategist. His fingers danced across a physical keypad, bringing up a complex web of interconnected financial nodes. Julian's legal counsel dispatched 6 urgent, encrypted memos to the Delaware Chancery Court within an hour of your departure. They're trying to seal the docket on your notice of active legal standing before the financial press gets wind of it. But as we anticipated, the damage to their internal morale is already done. Julian is terrified because he finally realized he bought a fortress built on sand. I replied quietly, staring at the glowing data streams. He spent 11 years believing he was a titan of Wall Street, never understanding that his entire empire was running on an incomplete, patched-up mathematical prototype. What about Richard Vance's portfolio? Elias's expression hardened, his dark eyes narrowing as he tapped 4 keys, clearing the screen to reveal a massive, branching organizational chart highlighted in crimson indicators. This is where the story turns from ordinary corporate theft into something far more dangerous. Arthur, over the past 11 months, while Julian was naively preparing for his glossy $1.2 billion IPO, his father-in-law was quietly gutting the core assets of Vance Capital Holdings. I leaned in closer to the glass display, my brow furrowing as I examined the rapid liquidation pattern. Show me the routing infrastructure. It's breathtaking in its malice, Elias explained, tracing a glowing red line with his finger across the digital map. Richard has systematically drained over $40 million from his primary domestic holding entities through 11 distinct wire transfers. Every single dollar was funneled through a chain of anonymous shell corporations registered in the Cayman Islands, layered through a secondary intermediary in Luxembourg, and finally deposited into accounts belonging to an obscure maritime logistics firm based out of Panama, a logistics firm with no actual ships or commercial port activity. I surmised, the cold clarity settling deep inside my chest. Exactly, Elias confirmed, zooming in on a series of flagged banking records. Our forensic algorithms breached their secondary ledger 20 minutes ago. This Panama shell isn't a retirement fund or a tax shelter, Arthur. It's an active conduit used to finance a notoriously ruthless international financial crime syndicate operating out of Eastern Europe, a group specializing in high-stakes debt enforcement, money laundering, and targeted extractions. Richard isn't just restructuring his wealth to survive your return. He's liquidating his entire domestic presence to pay off astronomical illicit debts before the federal regulators close in on his fraudulent patents. Before I could digest the staggering scope of Richard's criminal desperation, a sharp, high-pitched chime echoed through the underground hub. A secure, military-grade encrypted channel flashed red on the secondary console beside us. Elias tapped the screen immediately. It's a direct priority transmission from Sophia. Sophia Miller had served as Julian's executive secretary at Hudson Yards for 3 years. But what my arrogant son and his ruthless wife never suspected was that Sophia had been my undercover operative for 4. Recruited quietly through 2 trusted intermediaries after I watched her handle a sensitive corporate disclosure dispute with unshakable integrity, Sophia had provided Cipher Corp with an unbroken stream of internal calendars, encrypted memos, and executive communications. A high-resolution document packet expanded across the center monitor, stamped with a timestamp barely 6 minutes old. It was a digital copy of a top-secret, handwritten note, handwritten by Richard Vance himself during an emergency meeting in his private Midtown study. accompanied by a panicked audio memo recorded by Sophia from the adjacent office. Elias hit the audio playback button. Sophia's voice came through the acoustic speakers, carrying a low, controlled tension that chilled the damp air of the bunker. "Arthur, if you are receiving this, you need to alter your route immediately," Sophia whispered urgently over the static-laced line. "Richard completely snapped after Julian called him about your Delaware filing. He didn't call his corporate defense lawyers or his PR firm. He reached out directly to a private security broker named Marcus Aldridge, a man who handles off-the-books enforcement for his offshore network." The screen automatically opened the accompanying document packet, displaying a detailed tactical dossier containing my current vehicle's license plate number, the tracking frequency of my personal smartphone, and a highlighted map of Midtown Manhattan. Richard realized that if you survive long enough to present the missing 25% of the CipherGuard code to the federal banking regulators tomorrow morning, his entire life's work and his offshore escape plan will evaporate. Sophia's recorded voice continued, trembling slightly. "He's not trying to fight you in court anymore, Arthur. Marcus Aldridge has already dispatched a heavy commercial vehicle, a stolen construction flatbed, to intercept your truck along the West Side Highway near 42nd Street. They are planning to stage a fatal, multi-car collision in the heavy evening traffic, disguise it as an icy road accident, and ensure you never make it to your deposition." The recording cut out, leaving a heavy, suffocating silence hanging over the subterranean room. The 42 server racks continued their soft, rhythmic hum, casting flickering blue shadows across the brick walls. Elias turned slowly toward me, his face pale, his hands gripping the edge of the control console. "Arthur, they know you're in Manhattan. They're hunting you in broad daylight. We need to notify the NYPD or get you out of the state immediately." I stood perfectly still, looking at my reflection in the dark glass monitor, at the silver, jagged burn scars that lined my jaw and knuckles, scars born from the last fire Richard Vance had set for me 12 years ago. A slow, icy calm washed over my soul, burning away the last lingering traces of hesitation. "No, Elias," I said softly, my gravelly voice echoing with unshakable resolve as I reached for my dark wool coat. 12 years ago, I was caught unprepared because I trusted my family. Today, Richard is the one acting out of blind, cornered terror. Let Marcus Aldridge bring his flatbed to 42nd Street. He thinks he's hunting a ghost, but he's about to discover that some ghosts are far more dangerous than the men who tried to kill them. The heavy rain lashed against the fogged windows of Pelham's, a quiet, low-lit steakhouse tucked away in a quiet corner of Midtown Manhattan. It was the kind of establishment where Wall Street executives went when they wanted to conduct conversations they hoped the living world would quickly forget. I sat in a secluded corner leather booth, wrapped my dark wool coat, my scarred hands resting folded atop my wooden cane. At 8:15 p.m., the brass bell above the front door chimed softly, and Sophia Miller walked in. She wore an understated charcoal trench coat, looking like any other young professional ending a late shift. Sliding into the booth across from me, her dark eyes reflected a sharp, nervous tension that she struggled to suppress. Without a word, she reached into her leather handbag, pulled out a small, heavy black USB flash drive, and slid it across the white tablecloth until it rested against my mug of black coffee. "That drive came directly from Julian's private, personal safe in his office," Sophia whispered, her voice low and tight. "I managed to clone his local drive while he was locked in an emergency teleconference with Richard's legal team. It's protected by a 24-character encryption algorithm, but the creation metadata timestamp is unmistakable, October 18, 2013. Exactly 12 days after the fire in the Hamptons. Whatever is on that drive, Arthur, Julian has kept it sealed away from everyone, including Chloe." I stared down at the tiny piece of plastic. It sat in my calloused palm with the suffocating, weightless terror of an artifact containing either absolute nothingness or a nuclear revelation. "Thank you, Sophia," I said softly, closing my scarred fingers over the drive. "Get back to your apartment and stay off the main roads tonight. Richard is unraveling, and cornered animals bite blindly." 40 minutes later, I stood inside the high-speed private elevator, ascending to the 22nd floor of a prestigious residential high-rise on the Upper West Side. Evelyn's penthouse was a monument to clinical, expensive isolation, a vast space decorated with polished hardwood, museum-grade artwork, and floor-to-ceiling glass overlooking Central Park. Yet, despite its luxury, the apartment smelled faintly of stale red wine, prescription pill bottles, and a decade of unventilated grief. Evelyn opened the door before I even had the chance to knock. She stood in the dim foyer wearing a steel-gray cardigan wrapped tightly around her thin frame, her face pale and lined with hollow exhaustion. She looked at me, then down at my right hand resting on my cane, her lips trembling violently. "I knew you would come here tonight, Arthur," she whispered, stepping back to let me pass into the living room. "I've been sitting by this window every night for 12 years, waiting for a ghost to demand an accounting. I didn't take off my coat. I walked over to the marble coffee table, pulled out a military-grade portable encrypted laptop from my leather briefcase, and plugged the black USB drive into the port. With 3 rapid keystrokes using CipherCorp's bypass protocol, the 24-character encryption dissolved, exposing a single, isolated audio file labeled Study Recording 10181.wav. "Evelyn," I said, my voice dropping to a gravelly, icy pitch that froze the air between us. "Tell me what happened 12 days after the fire. Tell me why this file exists in your son's private vault." Evelyn's breath hitched in her throat. She stumbled backward, clutching the edge of a mahogany armchair as tears instantly welled in her bloodshot eyes. "Oh God, Arthur, please. Don't make me hear it again." I hit the spacebar. The laptop's speakers crackled with faint static, followed by the muffled, rhythmic ticking of a grandfather clock. Then, 2 distinct male voices filled the quiet room with sickening, pristine clarity. The first voice belonged to Richard Vance, deliberate, cold, and dripping with calculating authority. "The doctors at the Stony Brook burn unit said he survived the initial shock, Richard, but his pulmonary function is critical. He's in a medically induced coma on a ventilator. If he wakes up in 3 weeks, he'll ask about the patent filings. He'll ask why the Delaware holding company was restructured under my name while he was unconscious. Optimism is a liability, Julian. If he recovers, everything we've built this week unravels." A heavy, suffocating silence hung on the recording for 4 agonizing seconds. Then came the second voice, a voice I had taught to speak, a voice I had comforted when he was a frightened child. It was my son, Julian. He was 28 years old at the time, and his tone was smooth, steady, and entirely devoid of panic. "What are you asking me to do, Richard?" Julian asked. "Nothing active," Richard replied softly. "I'm asking you to authorize a DNR, a do not resuscitate order, and instruct the attending chief of medicine to withhold advanced pulmonary resuscitation protocols. We let nature take its course. You express dutiful filial grief, you cooperate with the probate court, and you sign the executive transfer documents declaring him permanently incapacitated. You become the sole CEO of Sterling & Associates by Monday." Another brief pause followed on the tape. I sat motionless in the leather chair, my knuckles turning white as I gripped my wooden cane, feeling every nerve ending in my body burn with a cold, devastating fury. On the recording, my 28-year-old son didn't weep. He didn't hesitate. He didn't defend the man who had worked 32 years on construction sites to pay for his Ivy League tuition. "Do it," Julian's voice echoed through Evelyn's living room, calm and unbothered. "Sign the authorization. Make sure the probate judge files the death certificate before the monthly banking audit. I'll handle my mother." The audio file clicked off, leaving an absolute deafening silence in the penthouse. I sat in the dark, staring at the blank laptop screen as the full, monstrous reality of my son's betrayal settled deep into my marrow. Julian hadn't just turned his back on me in the burning timber of the Hamptons. 12 days later, while I was lying in a hospital bed fighting for every breath of oxygen, he had actively signed a death warrant to secure his Wall Street crown. Evelyn collapsed onto her knees beside the marble table, her face buried in her hands, her body racked with heavy, hysterical sobs. "I was standing in the study doorway that night, Arthur." Evelyn wept, her voice breaking into jagged, pathetic shards. "I hid behind the double doors with my phone recording. I wanted to stop him. I swear to God I wanted to scream. But Richard threatened to destroy Julian's career, and Julian looked at me with cold eyes and told me to stay quiet if I wanted to keep this penthouse and our social standing." She looked up at me, her face wet with tears, her eyes wide with a decade of accumulated madness. "I took that recording, Arthur. I hid it on a drive to protect myself, but I was a coward, an utterly worthless, terrified coward. I couldn't bring myself to send it to the police because it meant sending my only son to federal prison. For 12 years, Arthur, 12 years I have choked down sleeping pills and drowned myself in gin every single night just to erase the sound of his voice telling Richard to let you die. I lived in this gilded cage while you were bleeding in the dark." I closed the laptop with a quiet, deliberate snap and placed it back into my briefcase. I stood up slowly, leaning heavily on my cane, looking down at the broken, weeping woman who had once been my wife. "Your cowardice didn't protect Julian, Evelyn," I said, my voice low, flat, and hollowed out of all emotion. "It turned him into a monster, and tomorrow morning the federal prosecutor will hear every single second of that tape." The grand ballroom of the Plaza Hotel on Fifth Avenue was a glittering cathedral of absolute arrogance, radiating the kind of astronomical wealth that believed itself permanently immune to the law. Underneath crystal chandeliers casting warm gold light across velvet-draped walls, 200 of Wall Street's most powerful figures gathered for the annual Vance Capital and Sterling & Associates Investor Gala. Waitstaff in pristine white tuxedos glided through the crowd carrying silver trays loaded with vintage champagne and beluga caviar, while a live string quartet filled the air with classical harmonies. At the center of the main floor stood Richard Vance, looking immaculate in a tailored tuxedo, his cheeks flushed with victory as he clinked glasses with major hedge fund managers. Beside him, Julian wore a smooth, arrogant smile, whispering confident lies into the ears of institutional investors about his company's resilience. Chloe swept through the crowd like a queen on display, her diamond necklace sparkling brightly against an emerald silk gown as she basked in the admiring gazes of Manhattan's elite. They were celebrating what they believed was the quiet containment of my return, a victory built on the assumption that an old man with burn scars could be silenced by money and media threats. At precisely 8 p.m., the heavy mahogany doors at the back of the ballroom swung wide open. A sudden chilling hush rippled outward from the entrance as I stepped into the room. I was dressed in a tailored charcoal wool suit, my silver hair combed back, my posture straight and unyielding. I didn't hide my right hand. My scarred knuckles rested calmly on the silver handle of my wooden cane, and the jagged silver burn lines climbing up my jawline caught the harsh glare of the chandeliers. Conversations faltered. A crystal champagne flute slipped from an investor's hand, shattering against the parquet floor. People stared, whispered, and backed away, recognizing the face they had buried 12 years ago. I walked down the central aisle with slow, deliberate steps, my eyes locked on the elevated podium where Richard was preparing to deliver his keynote address. Julian saw me first. The confident smile froze on his face, his skin draining of color as he gripped his champagne glass so tightly the thin crystal creaked under his fingers. Chloe's eyes widened in pure, aristocratic revulsion as she took an involuntary step back toward her father. Richard, however, forced a mask of icy composure, straightening his silk bow tie as I came to a halt 5 feet from the stage. "Arthur," Richard said, his voice carrying over the microphone, echoing through the silent ballroom with practiced condescension. "You've always had a flair for dramatic entrances, but this is a private investor gathering. If you have grievances regarding your old research, our legal representatives will handle you in court tomorrow." "I'm not here to negotiate with your lawyers, Richard," I said softly, my gravelly voice cutting through the room with frightening clarity. I reached into my coat pocket, pulled out a gold pocket watch, and glanced at the face. "I came to deliver a time-sensitive update." Richard's brow furrowed slightly, a flicker of irritation breaking through his calm facade. "What are you talking about?" "At precisely 7:52 p.m., 8 minutes ago, a joint emergency enforcement order was executed by the United States District Court for the Southern District of New York in direct coordination with the Department of Justice and the FBI Financial Crimes Division," I announced, stepping closer to the podium so every high-profile investor in the room could hear every word. "Every domestic and offshore asset tied to Sterling and Associates, Vance Capital Holdings, and your private family trusts has been officially frozen." A collective, sharp gasp echoed across the grand ballroom. Julian's face went entirely ghost white. "You're lying," he shouted, his voice cracking violently as he stepped forward. "You can't freeze 47 independent commercial accounts on a civil claim. It isn't a civil claim, son," I replied coldly, looking Julian dead in the eye. "It's a federal indictment for wire fraud, insider bank database violations under the Gramm-Leach-Bliley Act, and criminal conspiracy to commit corporate identity theft." The evidence package submitted to the federal prosecutor included the full, unedited audio recording from your private study on October 18, 2013. The conversation where you authorized Richard to withhold medical resuscitation while I lay in the burn unit. The crowd erupted into chaotic murmurs. Several prominent board members stared at Julian in absolute horror as the horrific reality of the allegations swept through the room. Over at the marble bar, Chloe scoffed loudly, attempting to maintain her arrogant composure. "This is absurd. He's an unhinged, bankrupt old man making desperate accusations." She turned to the bartender, slapping her black American Express Centurion card onto the counter. "Charge a bottle of Dom Perignon to my account right now to prove this lunatic wrong." The bartender swiped the heavy metal card through the terminal. A sharp, loud error tone chimed across the bar area. The digital screen flashed bright red. "Account suspended. Federal court hold. Code 909. "Try it again," Chloe shrieked, her voice losing all its aristocratic polish, rising into a panicked, shrill scream. "Swipe it again. It's an unlimited black card." "Ma'am, it's declined," the bartender said nervously, stepping away from the register. All Vance Capital merchant accounts just went dark. Before Chloe could process the humiliation, a rapid cascade of high-pitched chime notifications began echoing simultaneously from 200 pockets across the ballroom. Brokers, hedge fund directors, and institutional venture capitalists pulled out their smartphones. Their screens lit up with emergency alerts from Bloomberg terminals and internal risk assessment algorithms. The headlines read it in bold, flashing red text D. "A set freeze is sued for Vance Capital Holdings. All Sterling and Associates trading suspended pending federal audit." Panic ignited like wildfire. The curated illusion of Wall Street perfection shattered into absolute chaotic ruin. My fund has $40 million in their liquid credit line, a senior partner from a major investment firm yelled, shoving his chair back so hard it crashed to the floor. Get my legal team on the phone now. Pull our capital out. Another investor screamed into his phone, pushing past waitstaff as he sprinted toward the exit. Cancel the wire transfers. The whole firm is going under. Within 90 seconds, the grand ballroom turned into a mad stampede of millionaires and billionaires fighting to escape the sinking ship. Powerful men in tuxedos shoved past one another. Women in evening gowns abandoned their champagne glasses, and the room emptied in a flurry of panic and screams, leaving the high-end catering untouched on silver trays. When the dust settled, the grand room was dead quiet, save for the hum of the air conditioning. Richard stood frozen on the podium, gripping the wooden edges until his knuckles turned blue, his eyes wide, bloodshot, and hollowed out by the sudden total destruction of his life's work. Julian slumped against a mahogany table, staring at his useless smartphone as his billion-dollar empire vanished into thin air. Chloe stood at the bar, sobbing uncontrollably as her luxury card lay useless on the marble counter. I straightened my coat, took my wooden cane, and looked at the broken family standing amidst the wreckage of their own greed. "Enjoy the evening," I said softly. Turning my back on them and walking out into the cold Manhattan night, the icy pitch-black waters of the Hudson River churned violently as the mega-yacht, the Meridian, carved its way through the freezing winter gloom. On board, 40 elite guests were huddled in the lavish main salon, pretending that their financial world wasn't collapsing around them. Meanwhile, in a private executive cabin on the lower deck, Richard Vance sat shivering despite the heavy heating, his face ash gray. Beside him stood Marcus Aldridge, his ruthless legal advisor and fix-it man, frantically typing on an encrypted satellite phone. Their domestic bank accounts were frozen, but the Meridian was heading toward international waters, carrying 2 offshore hard drives designed to trigger an emergency transfer of $230 million before the federal net closed completely. They believed they had found an escape hatch. They were wrong. I was already waiting for them near the stern railing, wrapped in my heavy wool overcoat, my scarred hands resting calmly on the silver grip of my cane. Thanks to Sophia Miller's high-level security clearance as Julian's executive secretary, my name had been quietly added to the yacht's private crew manifest hours before departure. When Marcus stepped out onto the breezy deck to check the radar, he caught sight of my figure standing near the stern. His confident stride froze instantly, his jaw went slack, and his phone nearly slipped from his gloved fingers as he realized the man whose life he had tried to erase was standing 6 feet away from him on a vessel moving at 20 knots. "You shouldn't be on this boat, Sterling," Marcus hissed, his voice sharp, cold, and laced with suppressed panic. "How the hell did you bypass harbor security?" "You're running out of time, Marcus," I said softly, my gravelly voice cutting through the freezing wind. "The federal district court already signed the warrants. The coast isn't clear." Marcus took a slow, deliberate step toward me, his eyes narrowing as his calculating mind weighed his remaining options. He realized that if Richard was arrested tonight, his own career and freedom would burn with him. "Listen to me, Arthur," Marcus whispered, leaning in close, dropping his voice into a desperate, urgent tone. "You want justice, but justice doesn't pay for 12 years of suffering. Richard has $50 million in liquid capital sitting in an untraceable Swiss ledger right now. I can execute a direct, instant wire to an anonymous trust in your name in 30 seconds. 50 million cash, Arthur. Free and clear. No courtrooms, no media circus. Just take the money, walk off at the next marina, and let Richard slip away into retirement." I looked at Marcus for a long, silent moment. Then a cold, faint smile touched the unscarred side of my face. I reached into my coat pocket, pulled out my smartphone, and turned the glowing screen directly toward his face. Marcus blinked, staring at the screen. It wasn't a bank portal. It was a live, high-definition audiovisual feed displaying his own face, complete with a running timestamp and an official seal at the top of the frame. "That feed," I said calmly, my voice echoing over the roar of the engines, "is currently broadcasting on a military-grade encrypted channel directly to 3 federal judges, 2 senior prosecutors at the Department of Justice, and the lead field office of the FBI Financial Crimes Division. Every word of your $50 million bribe, along with your full confession regarding the credit fraud and the offshore liquidation, has just been entered into the official federal record." Marcus's face went the color of wet concrete. His mouth opened, but no sound came out. Before he could react, 2 high-speed FBI tactical boats roared out of the freezing darkness, their blue and red emergency lights cutting through the heavy river mist. Powerful searchlights pinned the Meridian in a blinding white glare. "Federal agents, stand down and heave to!" A booming megaphone voice echoed across the water. Within 90 seconds, 2 tactical teams in heavy body armor climbed over the stern railings, their weapons drawn, securing the vessel with terrifying efficiency. Special Agent Marcus Vance marched directly down the deck, holding a thick stack of federal arrest warrants. "Richard Vance, Marcus Aldridge," Agent Vance yelled over the engine roar. "You are under arrest for conspiracy, wire fraud, and obstruction of justice. Put your hands behind your backs." 2 federal agents shoved Marcus against the brass railing, snapping heavy steel handcuffs around his wrists. Down in the salon, Richard was dragged out in front of 40 terrified millionaires, his expensive tuxedo rumpled, crying hysterically as the cold steel locked over his wrists. Standing by the railing under the bright searchlights, I watched as the 2 men who had tried to burn me alive were marched away into the dark. The trap had sprung, the empire was dead, and justice had finally arrived on the freezing waters of the Hudson. The heavy, sterile air inside the federal waiting room on the 14th floor of the Lower Manhattan Department of Justice building smelled faintly of industrial disinfectant and stale coffee. Outside the tall glass windows, a gray December rain washed over the jagged financial district, but inside a heavy, irreversible quiet had settled. I sat alone on a hard plastic chair, my hands resting on the silver grip of my wooden cane, looking down at a cream-colored envelope resting on my knee. The envelope had been handed to me late last night on the deck of the Meridian by Sophia Miller. It carried no stamp and no return address, only my name written in Evelyn's fragile, trembling handwriting. I carefully unsealed the paper, unfolding 2 handwritten pages dated just 2 days prior. "Arthur," the letter began, the ink slightly smudged by dried tears. "By the time you read these words, I will have already walked through the front doors of the federal prosecutor's office to surrender myself as a co-conspirator. I am writing this because I can no longer carry the crushing weight of my own cowardice and remain a human being worth living. 12 years ago, I heard Richard and Marcus discuss letting you die in that burn unit. I hid behind the study door, recorded their voices, and then stayed silent because I was terrified of losing our wealth, our status, and our son. That silence was my crime, Arthur. You paid for my greed with your face, your hands, and 12 lost years. I do not ask for your forgiveness. I have no right to ask for something I do not deserve. I only ask that you know every morning for 12 years I awoke to the haunting reality of what I allowed to happen. My confession is not penance, but it is the absolute truth, and it is the least I owe you." I folded the letter slowly, placing it back inside my coat pocket as a cold, heavy ache settled deep inside my chest. Evelyn had chosen her prison long before the FBI ever signed her warrant. The heavy oak doors at the end of the corridor swung open, breaking the silence. 2 armed federal marshals escorted Julian into the waiting room. My son was unrecognizable. The polished, arrogant CEO who had strutted through Hudson Yards 9 weeks ago in a $10,000 bespoke suit was completely gone. He wore a drab gray institutional jumpsuit, his wrists bound by heavy steel handcuffs attached to a belly chain, his dark hair unwashed, his eyes bloodshot and hollowed out by terror. Behind him walked his chief public defender, carrying a thick folder of federal charging documents. "You have 5 minutes, Mr. Sterling," the marshal said flatly, unlocking the chain enough to let Julian sit. Julian didn't sit. The moment his eyes locked onto my face, his entire body began to shake violently. He stumbled forward, his leather shoes dragging against the linoleum floor, and collapsed outright onto his knees right in front of my chair. "Dad, oh God, Dad, please!" Julian wept, his voice cracking into a jagged, pathetic shriek that echoed off the institutional walls. He pressed his bound hands against my knees, his forehead touching his knuckles as he sobbed hysterically. "You have to help me. You have to talk to Special Agent Vance and the federal prosecutors. My attorney just went over the grand jury indictment. They're charging me with 11 counts of wire fraud, aggravated identity theft, and conspiracy under the RICO Act. They're looking at a mandatory minimum of 8 to 12 years in a federal penitentiary." I sat perfectly still, looking down at my son. I didn't pull away, nor did I reach out to comfort him. My expression remained as unreadable as the gray sky over the Hudson River. "Dad, listen to me." Julian choked out, his eyes wide with pure, unadulterated desperation as he looked up at my scarred face. "I was manipulated. Richard and Chloe planned everything from the start. I was young, I was 28, I was terrified of going bankrupt. I didn't realize what Richard was doing with the offshore accounts. You have the living trust now, Dad. You own the entire CipherGuard patent structure. You have the power to tell the DOJ that this was a private family dispute, that you authorized the internal patent transfers. If you drop the formal complaint, the federal conspiracy charges crumble. A family dispute, Julian? I asked softly, my gravelly voice dropping to a low, icy pitch that made him freeze. Is that what you called it on October 18th, 2013? When you sat in Richard's study and authorized him to withhold my pulmonary resuscitation while I lay unconscious in a hospital burn unit? Julian gasped as if he had been punched in the chest. The color drained from his face entirely, leaving him looking like a ghost in his prison jumpsuit. I was desperate, Dad. Desperation is an explanation, son, not an excuse, I said, my voice steady, quiet, and carrying an unshakable, tragic authority. You didn't just turn your back on me in the burning timber of the Hamptons. You signed my death warrant 12 days later to secure a Wall Street crown you didn't earn. Before Julian could answer, the side door opened, and Special Agent Marcus Vance stepped into the hallway, holding a fresh set of legal updates. Mr. Sterling, Agent Vance said, addressing me respectfully before casting a cold glance down at Julian. I thought you should know that your daughter-in-law, Chloe Vance, was taken into federal custody 20 minutes ago at JFK Airport. Julian blinked, his jaw dropping. Chloe? She was at her family's estate in Connecticut. She was attempting to board a private charter flight to Switzerland, Agent Vance explained coldly. Yesterday afternoon, she filed an emergency petition for an expedited divorce in New York State Court, attempting to liquidate and transfer $18 million in joint marital real estate assets into an offshore trust before your asset freeze took effect. The IRS Criminal Investigation Division flagged the wire attempts. She has been officially charged with federal tax evasion, money laundering, and obstruction of justice. The final piece of Julian's world shattered into dust. His wife, the woman for whom he had sacrificed his father, his honor, and his soul, had abandoned him the second the ship began to sink, leaving him to face the federal prosecutors entirely alone. Julian slumped back against the floorboards, weeping silently, his spirit completely crushed. Dad, please, Julian whispered, his voice barely audible over the hum of the fluorescent lights. Don't leave me to rot in a federal prison. I'm your only son. I leaned forward slowly, resting my scarred hands on my cane, looking deep into the eyes of the man I had raised. I loved you from the second you were born, Julian, I said, placing every word like a heavy stone in an eternal wall. And I love you today. But true love does not mean shielding you from the consequences of your own monstrous choices. If I use my influence to erase your crimes today, I wouldn't be saving you. I would be destroying the last remnant of your soul. You will serve your time. You will stand before the federal judge. And when you walk out of that prison years from now, broke, humbled, and stripped of your arrogance, I will still be your father. But you will re-enter the world as a man who understands that honor, dignity, and human life are not negotiable. I stood up, buttoned my coat, and picked up my wooden cane. I didn't look back as the marshals pulled Julian to his feet. I walked out of the DOJ building into the cold Manhattan rain, leaving the wreckage of my son's ambition behind me forever. The crisp Pacific Ocean breeze carried the faint scent of salt water and eucalyptus across the high-rise balcony of my 20th floor apartment in San Francisco. Below me, the majestic arches of the Golden Gate Bridge stood illuminated against the dark water, glowing like a beacon of red steel in the midnight fog. It was New Year's Eve, December 31st, 2025. Across the bay, fireworks erupted in dazzling bursts of crimson, gold, and emerald. Reflecting off the glass towers of the city, I stood by the railing, wrapped in a comfortable charcoal wool sweater, holding a steaming mug of black coffee with both hands. For the first time in 12 agonizing, bone-chilling years, my lungs expanded fully, and a profound, unshakable sense of inner peace washed over my soul. The house in the Hamptons was nothing more than an old memory, its scorched ground long since cleared. My life savings, along with every single dollar from the private restructuring of the CipherGuard patent framework, rested securely inside the untouchable vault of my private living trust. The heavy, suffocating digital shadow cast by my son, his wife, and Richard Vance had been completely erased from my existence. The wheels of federal justice were turning steadily without any need for my intervention. Richard Vance faced 2 decades in federal prison. Chloe was navigating her own fraud indictments, and Evelyn was serving her time with a quiet, contrite dignity. Beside my coffee mug on the small glass table lay a heavy, gold-embossed document packet that had arrived by courier earlier that afternoon. It was a formal petition stamped with the official seal of the United States Department of Justice, signed directly by the Deputy Attorney General. The federal government was offering me a multi-year contract to serve as senior chief advisor to the DOJ's Financial Crimes and Cybersecurity Task Force. They didn't just want my original encryption source code. They wanted the mind that had built an empire from the shadows, asking me to help hunt down the world's most sophisticated corporate predators. I smiled faintly at the Pacific horizon, taking a quiet sip of coffee. At 68 years old, with scars tracing my knuckles and jawline, I was no longer hiding. I was stepping back into the light on my own terms. At precisely 11:45 p.m., 15 minutes before the turn of the new year, my smartphone chimed on the table. The caller ID displayed a restricted, automated digital origin. Federal Correctional Institution, Otisville, inmate collect call. I took a slow, deep breath, set my coffee down, picked up the phone, and pressed the green button. This is an automated call from a federal correctional facility, a flat, mechanical voice announced over the line. Press 1 to accept charges. I pressed 1, placed the phone against my ear, and waited in quiet silence. Dad? Julian's voice came through the speaker, but it was barely recognizable. The smooth, arrogant, polished Wall Street tone he had used while pacing his Hudson Yards corner office was completely gone. In its place was the raw, broken, desperate rasp of a man sitting in a stark concrete cell, wearing a canvas jumpsuit, stripped of every luxury he had ever stolen. "I am here, Julian," I replied softly. My voice as calm and steady as the deep ocean waters below my balcony. A heavy, jagged sob erupted from his throat, echoing through the static of the prison telephone system. "Dad, please?" "I couldn't let the year end without hearing your voice. I'm so sorry. God, Dad, I'm so deeply sorry for everything I did to you." I listened quietly, watching the distant lights of a cargo ship gliding beneath the Golden Gate Bridge, saying nothing. "The public defender told me yesterday that Richard's legal team is trying to pin the entirety of the offshore Cayman wires on me." Julian wept hysterically, his breath catching in his throat. "Chloe's attorney served me with divorce papers in my cell this morning, Dad. She took whatever liquid assets she had left and turned state's evidence against me. Everyone I ever trusted, everyone I ruined my life for, they all abandoned me. I have nothing left, Dad. I'm facing 10 years in this place." I closed my eyes briefly, letting his frantic, agonizing words hang in the cool night air between us. The pain of hearing my only child weep from a prison cell tore at the deepest, most vulnerable fibers of my heart. But the lesson I had forged through fire and betrayal held absolute and unshakable. "Julian," I spoke slowly, placing every word like a heavy granite block in an eternal wall. "I hear your pain, my son, but you must understand that the collapse around you is not a curse. It is the natural weight of the truth finally catching up to the lies you built your life upon. Dad, please?" Julian choked out, begging like a frightened child in the dark. "Can you ever forgive me? Can you ever look at me as your son again after what I did to you in that burn unit?" "Julian, look at the sky tonight," I answered, my tone dripping with a profound, solemn dignity. "I loved you from the very second you took your first breath in that hospital room 40 years ago, and I will continue to love you until the day I take my last. That truth has never changed, and it never will. I do not carry hatred for you in my heart. But love does not mean allowing myself to be destroyed so that you can escape the consequences of your own choices. I forgave you in my heart the moment I stepped out of those flames 12 years ago. But legal accountability is a debt you owe to society, not to me. I'm so afraid." "Dad," he whispered, his voice trembling violently against the receiver. "Fear is the beginning of wisdom, son," I replied firmly yet gently. "If I had used my influence to buy your freedom, if I had covered up your federal crimes, I would have been an accomplice to the destruction of your soul. Serving your time before the law is the only path left for you to rebuild your humanity. You will serve these years. You will face the court. You will learn what it means to earn an honest dollar. And when you walk out of those prison gates years from now, humble, broke, and stripped of your foolish pride, I will be standing right there at the gates to welcome you home. But you will step back into the world as a real man, a man who understands that honor, dignity, and family are sacred." Silence stretched over the line, heavy, solemn, and absolute. For the first time in 12 years, Julian didn't offer a rebuttal, an excuse, or a manipulation. He simply wept quietly, accepting the boundary his father had drawn with unyielding love. "Happy New Year, Julian," I said softly. "I will be praying for your strength." "Happy New Year, Dad," he choked out. I gently tapped the screen, ending the call with a quiet click. I set the phone back down on the glass table next to Clara's photograph, picked up my coffee mug, and looked out as the clock struck midnight. Fireworks burst across the San Francisco sky, illuminating the dark waters in a brilliant spectacle of light. Protecting myself hadn't made me cruel. It had restored my dignity as a father, a leader, and a man. True strength is not found in how much abuse you can endure for the sake of keeping the peace, but in having the courage to set ironclad boundaries when love is met with betrayal. Thank you for following this long, emotional journey on Dad's ultimate payback. If Arthur Sterling's story taught you that true love requires unshakable self-respect and legal justice, please hit the like button, share your thoughts in the comments below, and subscribe to the channel for more stories of unshakable strength and family accountability. Remember, standing up for yourself isn't vengeance, it is self-preservation. See you in the next story.